In New Jersey, on a street long abandoned, there stood an apartment building, towering like a monument to a forgotten time. Broken windows, rusted balconies, and stained gray walls made the place look more like a giant tomb than a home for the living. Locals had long grown used to avoiding it. For decades, stories had circulated. Anyone who moved into apartment 9B vanished without a trace. Every night, when the city grew silent, a single window on the 9th floor still glowed with light. It seemed as if someone lived there, or worse, that something had never left. Whispers drifted through the cold night air, like the sighs of a past that refused to be buried. The 42-year-old woman stood with a small suitcase in hand before the rusted iron doors of the building. Her name is Rose. After a shattered divorce, she believed that a new beginning here might help her escape the weight of her past. The cheap apartment, tucked away in a neglected part of town, was her last choice when every other door in life had already closed. Inside, the air was thick with mold and dust, making her very first breath catch in her throat. The old wooden stairs groaned underfoot, a low, weary lament. The hallway stretched long and dim, lit unevenly by flickering fluorescent bulbs, each sputtering glow breaking into the silence like the faint heartbeat of something near its end. At the far end of the hall, the elderly manager appeared briefly. Her wrinkled face and averted eyes betrayed no warmth as she handed over the keys. In her husky voice, she offered only a curt remark. This apartment never kept its tenants for long. No further explanation, no friendliness. Then she disappeared behind a rotting wooden door, leaving behind a heavy silence. The door to 9B creaked open with a drawn-out groan. The room inside was small and cold. Water stains streaked the walls, plaster peeled from the ceiling, and the window hung slightly ajar, letting the night wind slip through with a faint hiss like whispering breath. The woman set down her suitcase, reminding herself this was only a beginning, then sat gently on a dust-covered chair. Night fell faster than she had expected. The city outside lay nearly silent, broken only by the distant hum of engines. At midnight, a new sound rose within the apartment. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, steady, as if someone were moving from the bedroom into the living room. But she knew with certainty that she was alone. She rose quickly and switched on every light. The yellow glow washed over the space, revealing no one. The footsteps ceased, leaving only an oppressive silence that seemed to freeze the air. She moved cautiously, ears straining, heart pounding. But there was nothing. Back in the living room, her eyes caught on the wall beside the chair. A thin crack had appeared, long and narrow like a claw mark. The paint peeled back, cold and gray, evoking the image of torn skin. She reached out to touch it. The edge felt sharp, icy, and she drew her hand back instantly. The air thickened with dampness, as though the wall itself had exhaled a weary breath. That night, sleep was fractured. The ticking of the clock echoed too loudly in the silence. She drifted in and out of uneasy dreams, often waking with the uneasy sensation that someone was standing just beyond her sight, separated only by a thin wall. By morning, pale sunlight pushed through the dusty window, illuminating the crack still etched deep in the wall. It was small, but its presence could not be ignored. She stepped closer, studying it. Something seemed to stir beyond the surface, dark, wavering, as though the wall was not solid at all, but a stretched skin concealing whatever lay beneath. A new beginning, that was what she had told herself. But apartment 9B seemed to have very different plans for its newest tenant. Nah. Nights inside apartment 9B felt longer than anywhere else. When the clock struck midnight, the darkness seemed to thicken, swallowing every corner of the room. The woman lay still on the old bed, trying to reassure herself that the sounds from the night before were nothing but illusions born of exhaustion. But the silence was too heavy, as though the entire building had stopped breathing, waiting for something to reveal itself. Then the sounds began. No longer the scattered footsteps, but a faint murmur so soft it almost blended with the beating of her heart. At first, it resembled the wind slipping through a crack in the door. But the longer she listened, the clearer it became that there was rhythm in it. Fragmented whispers, vague as echoes from someone else's dream. The sound didn't come from outside, but from deep within the wall across from her bed. She sat upright, eyes fixed on the cold surface. The small crack from the previous night now seemed longer, branching into fine lines like a dark network of veins. The murmur repeated itself, sometimes near, sometimes distant, at times as if right by her ear. She couldn't make out the words, yet she felt with certainty that they were pleas for help, strained, desperate. The tension kept her from sleep. In the flickering light of the bedside lamp, she opened her notebook and began to write down what she heard. At first, only messy notes. Male voice, low, fragmented, then female voice, sobbing, like begging. At times, the sounds rose into shrill pitches, like a child lost in the dark. Night after night, the notebook filled with senseless but haunting lines. Each time she reread them, it felt as though she was touching fragments of lives trapped within the wall, those who had once lived here, now reduced to ceaseless echoes. One afternoon, as she went downstairs, the old landlady appeared again, slow, silent. Her eyes avoided hers, her lips pressed tightly when the woman tried to mention the sounds in the wall. For a brief moment, the landlady's face tensed, then froze into cold indifference. Without a word of explanation, she turned away, leaving behind the empty hallway and the flicker of a buzzing light bulb. That avoidance was confirmation enough. There was something here best left unspoken. When she returned to her apartment, the wall had changed visibly. The cracks stretched into jagged lines, swelling into rough patches, its colors sickly, like something festering beneath a thin layer of skin. At times, when outside light shone through, the surface seemed to ripple, rising and falling as if it were breathing. She no longer knew what was real and what was exhaustion-induced hallucination. The voices were no longer fragmented whispers. They became broken phrases, cries for help, choked off mid-sentence. One night, as she scribbled notes, the sound erupted into a scream not only heard in her ears, but vibrating through her bones, shaking her to her knees. The room trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. In the haze of that moment, she collapsed, her notebook flying across the floor, its pages crumpled, ink half-written. The scream echoed in her skull even as darkness surged in, dragging her into unconsciousness. When she opened her eyes, the gray pallor of morning light seeped through the dusty window. The room was silent. The wall stood still, as though the night had been only a nightmare. Yet on the ground, beside the fallen notebook, lay scattered dust and the air reeked of mold stronger than ever. The crack had now spread across the wall, like dark veins burrowing into the apartment. The woman sat motionless, her eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. She realized she was no longer just a tenant. She had become a witness, and perhaps the next victim, in the story the wall was telling in the voices of the imprisoned dead. The third day in apartment 9B began with pale light filtering through the dusty window frame. Yet the woman no longer felt that morning meant a new beginning. Each awakening was merely an extension of the previous night's nightmare. Her head felt heavy, her eyes shadowed, her body trembling as though recovering from a fever. On the wall, the rough cracks remained, clinging to her gaze like invisible eyes. While arranging the old wooden cabinet in the corner of the living room, her fingers brushed against something wedged inside a rotten drawer. Carefully pulling it out, she discovered a thin notebook, its cover peeling, reeking of mold. The pages had yellowed, stained with water, as if they had been left in dampness for years. As she flipped through, frantic handwriting emerged. The former tenant of this apartment had left behind entries soaked in fear. At first, the handwriting was steady, describing insomnia, strange murmurs echoing from the walls. But as the pages went on, the writing grew shaky, fragmented, as though written under unbearable terror. The middle pages spoke of being watched. The writer described hallways that stretched endlessly at night, with doors repeating the same number. I left my room to find a way out, but the corridor only led me back to 9B. Every door was 9B. I don't know what is real anymore, what is illusion. Another passage read, "Sometimes I feel breath right at the back of my neck. When I turn around, no one is there. Yet the mold and chill wrap around me as if a body were standing inches behind." The woman's spine turned cold. These descriptions mirrored her own experiences over the past few days. The final page of the notebook ended abruptly. Only a single hurried line remained, ink smeared, incomplete. "If anyone finds this notebook, I have been swore." The last word vanished in a blurred streak, as though torn away by an unseen hand. The woman gripped the notebook tightly, her palm icy. Silence in the room suddenly thickened, as though someone were standing behind her, watching every move. That feeling grew stronger. Each time she turned, the light flickering through the window revealed nothing but emptiness, yet her eyes insisted on a fleeting shadow, a figure, not solid but like a dark stain against brightness, appearing for a moment before dissolving. When night fell, the wall no longer whispered in fragments. Now it hummed in dissonant chords, layered voices overlapping, occasionally breaking into warped laughter. The sounds wound through the apartment, like dozens of throats imprisoned, singing together a chorus of despair. At the height of the tension, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Slow, heavy, each step striking like stone. The woman pressed her eye to the peephole. The faint light of the flickering bulb revealed a figure passing by. It was her upstairs neighbor. She had never seen him in daylight. A gaunt frame, hollow eyes, skin pale and drained of light. He did not look at her, did not knock, only trudged past with weighty steps. At the end of the corridor, the bulb sputtered and died, swallowing his form into darkness. Her heart raced wildly. She pressed her back against the door, her body rigid. The apartment was no longer just a whispering wall. It contained an unseen presence that lingered, watching, following. She realized loneliness was no longer the worst fate. Far more terrifying was the knowledge that she would never again be truly alone. In the corner of the room, the tattered notebook lay open, its frantic scrawls seeming to shift beneath the weak light, as if that invisible hand had never stopped writing. One night, just as the clock struck midnight, the entire apartment was swallowed by suffocating darkness. The power went out. The room was as silent as if buried deep underground. The woman rummaged through the cabinet, finding an old flashlight whose dim beam cast a trembling cone of pale yellow, flickering as though it might die at any moment. The hallway outside stretched into silence. Every step she took echoed unnaturally, like the hollow resonance of a bottomless well. The walls on either side were mottled with shadows, paint peeling away like scales from rotting flesh. The stench of mildew was stronger than ever, creeping into her nose like the cold scent of grave soil. She slowed her pace, the flashlight sweeping across the doors. 9B. Dace. Another step forward. 9EB again. Every few meters, the same number repeated, unchanged, frigid. No exit, no staircase, no entrance. Only an endless chain of the very apartment she was trying to escape. Her heart hammered as she spun around, hoping to find her way back. But behind her, it was the same. Rows of doors, each etched with the same number, as if the building had swallowed her into a labyrinth with only one inevitable end. The flashlight flickered, its wavering light grazing the wall. Faint handprints appeared. At first, just a few smudges, but with each step, more emerged, layer upon layer, thick with dried, blackened blood. Every handprint pointed in one direction, the door of 9B before her. A chill swept across her face, making her shudder. The door trembled, then its surface began to deform. Wooden planks swelled, split, folding inward into grotesque ridges. From its cracks, a dark void gaped wide, curling like jagged teeth. The door to 9B was no longer a door. It had become a vast open mouth, waiting. She stumbled backward, trembling hands clutching the flashlight. But its frail light could not hold back the darkness bleeding from the cracks in the wall. The fractures spread, weaving into a tangled web, flowing like veins of black, swelling, pulsating, groaning. Each crack opened like a tiny mouth, whispering in hundreds of voices at once. The hallway filled with sound, chaotic, overlapping. Cries, wails, hoarse laughter. Together they formed a grotesque chorus, a requiem of those devoured. Her ears rang, breath caught in her chest. She wanted to run, but her legs felt fused to the icy floor. The flashlight dimmed. In its final flicker, she saw the wall opposite. Countless faces pushing through the cracks. Twisted incomplete, eyes hollow, mouths gaping in screams. Some were mere shadows, others detailed enough to show split lips, jagged teeth, all pressed together, surging toward her. The woman let out a soundless scream. She turned to flee, but the corridor stretched on forever, no end in sight. Every step brought more doors, marked 9B, more fissures, more faces. Her lungs tightened, her heart threatened to burst. Then, behind her, a sound erupted. The warped door of 9B yawned wide into a black abyss. The entire hallway quaked, the cracks in the walls opening all at once, gasping like the lungs of a monstrous beast. A violent wind dragged her backward, pulling her off balance. She fell, fingernails clawing at the tiles, but the floor crumbled under the invisible force. Cracks spread beneath her palms, coiling like serpents, wrapping around her wrists, dragging her toward the gaping void. Her skin scraped against the fissures, searing as if cut by frozen blades. In her final moment before being consumed, the flashlight slipped from her hand, rolling across the floor. Its beam spun wildly, flashing against the wall smeared with bloody handprints. Amid the chaos, fresh words appeared, scrawled in crimson. No way out. 9B forever. Her final scream was swallowed as darkness engulfed her body. The corridor fell silent again. The cracks sealed. The door of 9B shrank back into its withered form. Only the dying flashlight remained, its light flickering faintly, like the last breath of something still alive. It's so. The woman's body crashed onto the living room floor like a discarded object. Everything around her was drowned in pitch-black darkness, broken only by the frantic pounding of her heartbeat echoing in her skull. When she opened her eyes, she realized she was back inside apartment 9B, but it was no longer intact. On the walls, fissures swelled grotesquely, gaping like infected wounds. They spread across every surface, crawling up to the ceiling, coiling around the floor, forming a tangled web of black veins. Each crack pulsed, rising and falling like lungs breathing. The murmurs were no longer muffled. They had become a full chorus of voices from those who had once lived here. Dozens, hundreds of voices overlapping, pleading, shrieking, laughing in rasping tones. The woman tried to rise, but the instant her hand brushed the wall, it stuck fast. The surface, once icy cold, turned soft and clammy, clinging to her flesh. She yanked hard, nails splintering, blood bursting from her fingertips, but she could not break free. The cracks widened, swallowing her joint by joint, strip by strip of skin. Her body quaked violently, her scream smothered in her throat. The skin on her arm dissolved, melting into the wall like hot wax. Vines stretched out from her flesh, branching into the growing lattice across the surface. She realized in horror she was becoming part of the apartment itself. A new layer of skin. A new voice in the eternal chorus. At the end of the hallway, the old landlady stood in silence, her dull eyes fixed upon the scene. Her silhouette was faint, as though she had witnessed this countless times before. She did not intervene nor utter a word. Her withered face bore only cold acceptance, as if this was simply the natural law of this apartment. When the assimilation reached her face, the woman sank fully into the dense blackness. Her voice shattered into fragments, blending with the hundreds of others. There was no individuality left, only a ceaseless harmony of trapped souls. She understood now. This was the fate of all who had once believed they could start anew inside 9B. Then silence reclaimed the space. The wall sealed over, smooth as though it had never opened. The apartment fell quiet again, blanketed in its heavy, moldy stench. Out in the corridor, the landlady quietly hung a fresh wooden sign upon the door, for rent. The next night, from afar, a window on the 9th floor lit up once more. How? On the storm-lashed coast of Oregon, whispers tell of a light that never dies. Perched upon jagged cliffs, a lantern hangs suspended, defying time itself. It once belonged to a woman who waited for her husband at sea. He never returned, but the lantern has never gone dark, burning each night like a beacon for those who have lost their way. Fishermen murmur that anyone who gazes upon its glow will hear a tender voice calling, luring them into the depths from which none ever return. Wandayendo. Margaret, a folklorist, walked through the skin-cutting cold of the Oregon coast. In her hand was a weathered leather journal, filled with fragments of legends she had gathered across the Pacific Northwest. But this time was different. No mere rumor or fireside tale. The lantern she sought, they whispered, still burned in truth. The path to the cliff twisted upward, the earth soft and slick with sea mist. Her boots sank into mud flecked with gravel, sliding with every step. Below, the ocean thundered against the rocks, its roar merging with the shriek of the wind. A grim symphony, like the ocean's own mournful breath. With every step, she felt herself drawn closer to something that did not belong to the world of the living. As the shadows thickened, Margaret saw it. Upon a sheer outcrop, untouched by human hand, a lantern burned. Its flame, golden and flickering, did not falter in the gale, as though shielded by an unseen hand. From afar, its glow was a lone, unblinking eye piercing the dark, at once inviting and threatening. Margaret froze, her skin rising in prickling waves. The impossibility of it all rattled her. No path led to that cliff. No hand could have placed the lantern there. Yet its light remained undeniable, brighter even, as her gaze fixed upon it. For an instant, she swore she saw a figure behind the flame, a slender woman's silhouette, her hair whipping wild in the wind. A coldness surged through Margaret, seeping from her knees to the soles of her feet. She drew a breath, but the air was too thick, too salt-heavy, as if the sea itself was swallowing her lungs. Her pulse hammered, and a single question carved itself into her mind. Was this legend come alive, or had she stepped across a threshold no human should ever cross? Beneath the cliff, the surf screamed white and merciless. Yet above that chaos, the lantern burned in calm defiance, untouched by nature's fury. Margaret opened her journal, but her pen trembled. The ink scrawled crooked as though the storm itself wrested the words from her hand. All else sank into shadow. Only the lantern's light remained, like the beating heart of night, a secret beacon summoning her closer. In that moment, Margaret knew research was no longer her only reason to go on. Another force, deeper and more perilous, had taken root within her. She had to see the lantern with her own eyes, and learn why it had never gone dark. Night along the Oregon coast was a suffocating shroud, a black veil without a single tear. The crash of waves rose from the abyss below, mingling with the lash of wind against the cliffs, as if thousands of unseen whips cracked in the dark. Yet through the frozen void, the lantern still burned, unmoved by storm, untouched by reason. Margaret stood transfixed, her eyes bound to its glow. She realized the light was no longer fixed. The lantern shifted slowly along the cliff's edge, each quivering shimmer like the fading imprint of invisible footsteps. No wind could carry a lantern in such a way. No rope could draw it forward. It moved of its own will. The sky, strangled by heavy cloud, gave no light of its own, yet the lantern cast a pallid trail across the coastal path. The glow wavered, brushing over slick moss and jagged stone, forming a fractured passage through the dark. Margaret found her feet already moving, unaware she had begun to follow. Each step sent loose rock tumbling into the chasm, their echoes joining the sea's roar, like the drumbeat of a funeral march from the deep. The lantern drifted farther, yet never vanished from sight. It kept its distance, always just beyond reach, close enough to lure, far enough to forbid. Its glow painted grotesque forms upon the cliff walls, long, grasping arms, twisted faces half buried in seaweed, all leaning toward her, aching to touch. The air grew colder. Mist clung to her clothes, seeping into her skin. Her steps grew heavy, but the compulsion within her only sharpened. In her chest, Her heartbeat matched the lantern's wavering pulse, as though her body had been drawn into its breath. A violent wave crashed below, spraying white salt into the air. Through that drifting haze, Margaret glimpsed her. The slender figure of a woman, hair in wild disarray, dress pale and fluttering like a torn shroud. Margaret shut her eyes, but when she opened them, only the lantern remained, floating like a phantom that knew its way home. The coastal path narrowed, crumbling stone leaving barely a strip wide enough for a footfall. Beneath lay the black abyss, where waves struck the cliff face like 1,000 hands pounding at a wall. The lantern did not slow. It led on, patient, unyielding, drawing Margaret deeper into the dark that swallowed all things. She could no longer tell whether she heard the thunder of the sea or the blood rushing in her ears. Each time she faltered, the lantern flared violently, its glow throbbing like an enraged heart, before gliding forward again, forcing her to follow. For one terrifying instant, Margaret felt her body was no longer her own, dragged onward like driftwood in a whirlpool. At last, the lantern came to rest upon a jagged outcrop above the sea. It hung in the air, no rope, no chain, burning calm and defiant against the howling gale. Waves below burst into white foam, circling the cliff in a ritual rhythm. Margaret stopped, her body soaked through, yet her eyes could not break away from that light. In that moment she understood. The lantern did not guide towards safety. It led elsewhere, to a threshold between sea and night, a place where a person could be erased from the world, leaving not a single trace behind. On the outcrop that jutted into the sea, the lantern still burned, bright, suspended like a beating heart against the void. Margaret stood motionless, her body drenched in mist and salt spray, her eyes locked upon the shimmering flame. Around her, the world began to change. The roar of wind and wave ebbed away, replaced by something softer, an indistinct murmur rising from the depths of the ocean. At first the voice was fragile, no louder than breath. Then it swelled, resonant, filling the air. A melody slow and mournful, a funeral lullaby echoing through the night. Each note slid along Margaret's spine like a blade of ice, making her shiver, yet binding her inescapably. The song coiled around her mind, sweet in its hypnosis, dissolving the fragile line between reason and delirium. Below, the waves began to shift. Their rhythm aligned with the voice, as though the entire ocean had become its orchestra. Each surge, each shattering crash against the cliffs, deepened the lament, layering it with the resonance of 1,000 drowned throats. Margaret clutched her chest, her breath unsteady. She knew she was hearing something that did not belong to this world, yet her soul yearned for it. The song no longer surrounded her. It seemed to resound from within her ribcage, pulling her into its harmony. The fog thickening around the outcrop began to swirl, spinning in slow, spectral circles beneath the lantern's glow. In the mist, Margaret glimpsed drifting shapes, arms reaching upward, hair streaming and sodden, eyes wide and frantic in silent pleas. They dissolved into the melody, vanishing into the sorrowful chorus of the unseen. The lantern's flame pulsed with the music, flashing brighter with each rise of the voice. Every flicker felt like a signal, a heartbeat of the sea itself, seducing her soul. Margaret's feet moved toward the cliff's edge, step by step, though her mind screamed in resistance. The rock beneath her boots was slick, cold, treacherous, but she could not stop. When the song reached its crescendo, the heavens tore open in a slash of lightning. For an instant, the storm illuminated her. A woman's figure, slim, draped in white, her dark hair whipped into a tangle by the sea wind. She stood still amid the fog, facing Margaret. Her face was veiled in shadow, but her presence radiated an eternal grief. Margaret trembled, her eyes wide with horror. She knew she was beholding the living witness, or rather, the lingering soul of the legend. The woman needed no gesture, no beckoning hand. The song was her summons, binding Margaret's heart, her feet, pulling her inch by inch toward the brink. A colossal wave rose, shattering into spray that mingled with the dirge. In that moment, Margaret felt herself poised on the threshold, between land and sea, life and death, flesh and phantom. The lantern still burned, unwavering, the single eye of the widow fixed upon her every step. The song was no longer music. It had become command, an invisible tether coiling around Margaret's soul, dragging her away from the world she once knew. Ye. The lantern trembled softly in the night, its glow no longer a simple flame, but a vein of molten blood coursing through the dark. The sea groaned below the cliff, each crashing wave a funeral drumbeat, carrying the dirge that filled the air. Margaret stood trembling, her eyes wide as the figure in the white dress emerged in sharp relief within the whirling fog. She stood upright, motionless, on the precipice where no human could stand. The long white dress, torn and stained with dark streaks, as if soaked in salt and blood from ages past, whipped violently in the wind. Black hair clung in tangled strands, yet could not veil the face that revealed itself. Pale as bone, its skin tinted with a deathly green, eyes hollow, yet glimmering as though reflecting the entire sea at night. Margaret's body locked in place, every muscle seized in terror. The song no longer rose from the ocean depths, but from the woman's own chest. Each note pulsed into the air, cracking the black sky to reveal ghastly streaks of pallid green light, like drowned corpses adrift beneath water. Shapes in the fog, arms, hair, faceless visages, floated toward her, winding around her like a living funeral shroud. Beside her, the lantern blazed brighter than ever. Its light clamped down on Margaret's gaze, forcing her to witness the spectacle. The woman tilted her head, lips parting, and from them unspooled a thin ribbon of black smoke. It curled into the wind, spilling downward across the cliffside, cloaking the very path Margaret had taken. Every escape was sealed. Only one way remained, forward toward the abyss. Fog swirled tighter around her, the salt-heavy stench choking her lungs. She staggered, desperate to turn back. But her feet were soldered to the cold stone. Each attempt to lift them was shredded by the rising song, cutting her will apart like fabric torn by a blade. The rhythm of the waves below fused perfectly with the hammer of her heart, until Margaret no longer felt she belonged to herself. The woman in white slowly raised her hand. The motion was delicate, almost tender, like an invitation, but it carried the weight of a command no mortal could resist. At once the lantern flared, flooding the cliff with a blinding gold as if a dead sun had erupted before her. In its glare, Margaret glimpsed another vision. Dozens, no, hundreds, of figures sinking into the water, their hands reaching in vain toward the shore, their eyes hollow, pleading, unredeemed. Shaken to her core, she could not look away. The lantern and the woman fused into a single hypnotic point, swallowing everything else. Wind shrieked, waves burst in white fury, but all was nothing more than accompaniment to the mournful hymn that would not end. In that moment, Margaret understood. She had been called, not by voice, but by soul. The woman needed no step forward, no touch of hand. The song and the light had done all. She simply stood there, a lighthouse of darkness, guiding the doomed into the sea. And Margaret, though she knew she was standing at a threshold from which no return was possible, could not resist. Neolao. Margaret stood at the cliff's edge, her breath ragged, mingling with the freezing mist. Below, the ocean yawned open like a colossal mouth, eager to devour any soul who strayed too near. Waves pounded in relentless fury, spraying white foam that rose like hundreds of grasping hands from the abyss. The woman in the white dress remained still, her hollow eyes blazing, locking onto Margaret's soul. The song endured, no longer music but a chain, an invisible binding that shackled her body. The lantern flared violently, its beam burning through her, scorching away the final flicker of resistance. Margaret felt her feet take one step, then another. The path back was gone. Each frozen breath coiled in her lungs, each slowing heartbeat fused with the rhythm of the sea. She knew that with another step, there would be no return. But her body no longer obeyed reason. She was nothing more than driftwood, carried on a current she could not fight. A violent gust swept over the cliff, carrying with it the stench of rotting seaweed. The heavens quaked with thunder, and in the lightning's flash Margaret saw faces, strangers she had never known, their eyes all the same. Empty, despairing, sinking slowly into the black sea. Their shapes drifted toward the woman in white, dissolving into the darkness that surrounded her, leaving only a muffled echo like cries silenced beneath water. The lantern shook violently, its flame surging upward into a pillar of fire against the storm. Its blaze was no warning, it was triumph, the sick exaltation of a ritual centuries old. Margaret stretched out her arms, entranced, and hurled herself into the light. In the moment her body tipped forward into the abyss, all sound ceased. Only the last echo of her heartbeat remained, absorbed into the unholy hymn. She plunged, the ocean slicing her skin like shards of glass. And before the darkness swallowed her whole, Margaret looked upward and saw the lantern, shrinking, vanishing into the storm above. The next morning the sea lay still, as though nothing had happened. An old fisherman, steering his boat toward open water, glanced up at the cliff. He froze. The lantern burned brighter than ever before, still alight even beneath the rising sun. Its glow seemed stronger now, fierce and unyielding, as though it had been fed a new soul. In the fishing village, a young girl who had once heard the legend saw it too, the flickering flame in the fog, whispering names of the lost. Any who lingered too long felt a faint, mournful song in the wind, soft yet unforgettable. No one ever found where Margaret had gone. Her weathered leather journal was never recovered. Only the lantern remained, burning brighter than ever, a testament that one more soul had joined the choir beneath the sea. And from that night onward, whoever gazed into its glow could never be certain they would return. The lantern, the immortal heart of the widow, would never go out. Niwa Awa. In the rotting carcass of an industrial city, humanity suffers a grotesque affliction. Blood hardens into glass, and veins toll like brittle bells when they fracture. Those who collapse do not bleed, they shatter, their bodies unraveling into shards of crystal, that chime a mournful hymn as they scatter. But beneath the city's foundations, buried deeper than steel and stone, something older still awakens. A creature whose heart beats in living things. Now, Marcus Hale, a maintenance engineer in the industrial sector, had long grown accustomed to the stench of burning oil and the groan of failing machines. But lately, a new sound haunted the air. A faint, chilling chime, like glass splintering in the wind. The first time he heard it was in the old foundry, where his longtime co-worker Joseph suddenly crumpled mid-shift. Joseph's body convulsed, his skin pale and drenched in sweat. Rushing to help, Marcus felt it through the man's soaked shirt. Veins stiff as wire, vibrating under his touch. A pale blue glow traced along Joseph's neck, translucent and glimmering like crystal. "Help me," Joseph rasped. Then came the crack. His arm bent unnaturally, snapping not like bone, but like brittle glass. Marcus staggered back, horrified, as Joseph's body fissured, splinter by splinter. No blood flowed, only a crystalline sheen spreading through his flesh. Within seconds, his friend disintegrated into 1,000 shards, scattering across the floor in a ringing cascade like a funeral bell. The other workers fled, their screams ricocheting down the iron hallways. But Marcus remained frozen, staring at the jagged remnants of a man who had once laughed beside him over late-night shifts. No breath, no blood, only silence, and the terrible hymn of glass breaking. In the days that followed, the city descended into quiet chaos. Whispers spread like wildfire of those who walked with chiming veins,
We have to get out
who
of here.
fell and shattered into nothing. Officials denied everything. Newspapers ran blank, but the streets emptied after dusk. Doors were bolted, windows veiled, and eyes averted as if the sickness could spread through a glance. Marcus could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, the sound returned. Joseph's collapse echoing in his chest, shards ringing in his skull. Worse still, on sleepless nights, when the wind whistled through the rusted vents atop the factories, he heard something deeper. A rhythm, a strange melody, reverberating from far beneath the earth. A thought rooted itself within him, unwelcome but unshakable. Joseph's death was no accident, and the plague was no natural disease. Something was hidden below the city, older and more terrible than rust or stone. And Marcus knew if he did not uncover it, his own veins would soon toll like glass bells. Nananiao, tea. The city hospital reeked of disinfectant, yet beneath the acrid sting lingered something colder, the faint tang of rust, mingled with the dust of ground glass. Marcus had come to claim Joseph's body, but the morgue lay barren. The record was blunt, patient fractured, no remains preserved. In the silent corridor, a voice broke the stillness. "You lost someone too, in the shattering?" He turned to find a gaunt woman in a white coat. Her eyes, ringed with sleepless shadows, burned with an intensity that unsettled more than comforted. She introduced herself, Dr. Iris Ward, resident physician. Without waiting for reply, she tugged him into a cramped laboratory where yellow light flickered over rows of vials. Inside the glass, blood was no longer blood. In one vial, liquid once red had grown translucent, flecked with jagged shards that caught the light like splinters of ice. Iris raised it carefully. "This isn't coagulation," she whispered. "It's restructuring. Blood turning into something akin to silica. No virus, no bacteria, as if the human body is learning to become something else. Marcus' skin crawled. The faint chime returned in his skull, echoing like a memory of breaking. Then the sound grew louder. From the ward next door erupted a chorus of clattering bells. They rushed into chaos. 5 patients screamed at once, bodies convulsing, veins glowing like molten glass beneath their skin. Then came the fractures, sharp, merciless, deafening. In an instant, their forms burst apart, crystalline shards cascading through the air, painting the corridor in a rain of glittering death. Noses scattered, windows shattered. Iris stood paralyzed, but Marcus dragged her back, shielding her from the storm of fragments. When at last the ringing dimmed, only a sparkling dust coated the floor, shimmering like frost beneath the lights. Iris's breath trembled. This can't be illness. It spreads another way, and I think the source lies beneath the sewer veins, where the old bedrock cuts through the city. Marcus glanced down at his own hand. A shallow cut still seeped red from the shards, but in the dim glow he caught a glint of translucence threading through the blood. His pulse thundered. The city was becoming an instrument for something vast and unseen. And if he and Iris failed to uncover it, every heartbeat would toll like glass bells until nothing remained but a symphony of ruin. Nawa. Rain slicked the city that night, turning the streets into broken mirrors beneath jaundiced lamps. Marcus and Iris followed a faded address buried in the patient files. Samuel Kerr, a sewer worker, the sole survivor of an accident that had reduced his crew to glass dust. They found him in a damp boarding room at the city's edge. Samuel was gaunt, eyes bloodshot, fingers twitching as though keeping time to an unheard rhythm. When Marcus introduced himself, Samuel only laughed. A rasping, stony sound. You hear it too, don't you? That ringing, it never leaves. His voice dropped to a whisper as Iris pressed him about the day of the accident. Samuel told of drilling into an unfamiliar vein of rock deep beneath the tunnels. From it spilled a cold blue glow, and then the singing began. Not human, not words, just the crystalline resonance of glass upon glass. His fellow workers froze, eyes hollow, until one by one they shattered. Samuel alone had fled, but ever since the song gnawed at his skull, louder with every night. As he spoke, Marcus caught it too. A faint tapping from beneath the warped floorboards, measured, relentless. Samuel grinned, pointing downward. It's singing for us, even here. The 3 descended into the sewers. The air reeked of damp stone and something sharper, the dry bite of powdered glass. Their flashlights carved tunnels of light across the walls, where veins of crystal jutted from the rock like arteries of frozen fire. Each step sent echoes bouncing through the dark, and from the depths came an answering chord, as if unseen hands were plucking strings woven from bone. Samuel buckled, clutching his skull, muttering prayers that melted into melody. Iris clung to Marcus, her voice barely a breath. It doesn't just kill, it's turning them into part of the song. Marcus stared into the blackness where the music swelled clearer, vibrating through stone and marrow alike. The chill in his bones told him they had crossed into something's domain, something not of flesh, not of man. And the symphony of glass was only beginning. Indeed. The deeper they ventured into the mine, the more the world above seemed like a forgotten dream. The walls glistened with moisture, streaked with veins of black ore that pulsed faintly, as though the rock itself had a heartbeat. The narrow passageways twisted endlessly, sometimes collapsing into suffocating tunnels, other times widening into caverns where the silence felt almost alive. Mark's lantern trembled in his grip, the flame quivering as if it feared what lay ahead. Shadows bent unnaturally along the jagged stone, stretching and contorting into forms that did not belong to the human world. Evelyn trailed her fingers along the damp wall, her breath shallow. She could feel something, an unseen rhythm, guiding her deeper, luring her forward with the persistence of a whispered command. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. A stench rose, iron, rot, and something far older. The ground beneath them was littered with scraps of rusted tools, helmets split down the middle, skeletal remains half buried in shale. Time had not eroded the violence etched into those bones. Some still bore the marks of desperate clawing, as if the miners had tried to tear through the earth itself in their final moments. Then came the sound. A low murmur at first, indistinct, like wind brushing against the stone. But it grew. Layer upon layer of voices, men, women, children, rising in a chorus too vast to belong to the living. They spoke in a tongue neither Evelyn nor Mark could comprehend, yet the meaning slithered through their minds, bypassing reason. Surrender. Become. Join us. Mark pressed his palms to his ears, but the voices only grew louder, drilling straight into his skull. Evelyn, however, stood transfixed, her eyes glazed, her lips parting as if to echo the chant. Her lantern light flickered, nearly extinguished, and in the dim glow, the walls began to move. Faces, countless, twisted, agonized, pressed outward from the rock, their mouths opening and closing in unison with the voices. The descent had ceased to be a path. It was no longer a mine but a threshold, and whatever awaited below was not content to remain buried. Da! The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The air churned, thick and suffocating, as if the mine itself had begun to breathe. In the center lay a pit, a wound in the earth, glowing faintly with a light that was not fire, but something raw, primordial. The voices rose from it, a deafening storm of whispers that battered the walls and rattled the bones of the dead. Evelyn stumbled forward, drawn to the edge, her eyes reflecting the pit's glow. Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her back with all his strength, but she resisted, her face slack and unrecognizable, as though something else had claimed her. The ground quaked beneath them, shards of stone falling like teeth from the ceiling. From within the pit, a shape stirred. At first, it was only a suggestion, a ripple in the glow, a distortion of space, but then it began to take form. Vast limbs, slick with black ichor, reached upward, and a face, eyeless yet seeing, pressed against the veil that separated earth from the void. Its mouth opened, and the chamber filled with a sound that was not a roar, but the breaking of worlds. Mark's lantern shattered. Darkness swallowed them, save for the pit's sickly glow. He dragged Evelyn away, her feet dragging. Her voice now a chorus that matched the whispers. She screamed words not her own, each syllable striking him like a blade. The chamber tilted, reality itself buckling under the weight of what clawed its way free. They ran, through collapsing tunnels, past walls that bled shadows, past bones that reached out with grasping fingers. Behind them, the pit widened, its glow spilling through the mine like veins of fire. The voices swelled to a crescendo, drowning out thought, drowning out fear, until all that remained was surrender. At the final passage, Mark forced Evelyn ahead of him, shoving her through the narrow gap. He turned back once, just long enough to see the rising form fill the chamber, its countless mouths opening in unison. His scream joined theirs as the earth swallowed him whole. Above ground, Evelyn collapsed on the barren soil. The mine sealed itself with a thunderous roar, leaving only silence in its wake. But in her chest, the whispers lived on, soft, steady, patient. The awakening had begun. Out.